All right, three, two, one, let's go. Steven Lubka, my man, thank you so much for joining, dude.
I'm excited, man. Excited for this chat. Great to see you again. Looking forward to it.
So we met at Pacific Bitcoin last year, which was
Yes.
just an incredible time. I got to meet so many awesome people there. Tell me about just your experience in this whole Bitcoin world, real quick. I just want to hear about how you feel about it all.
Yeah, it's I love it. It's phenomenal. I think getting into Bitcoin is one of the best things that ever happened to me. And a lot of people that'll say that, right? I think for people in the that aren't in this community, right? Hear that as like a financial thing, like, oh yeah, like people like Bitcoin if they made a bunch of money in it. But that's actually like almost 0% of why I say that. The reason I say it was one of the best things that ever happened to me is because of the community. Like it just connected me with a network of people that both in the discussion of Bitcoin and outside of like topics which have nothing at all to do with Bitcoin are just fantastic people, intellectually curious. It's just a vibrant community of discourse and talking about ideas and entrepreneurs and people who are doing interesting things. So I'm just so grateful for the people that I've met as part of the Bitcoin community. And I work in the industry, so it was a career for me too. So a lot of really meaningful things beyond just like investing in the asset or something like that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why it's been so enjoyable to follow your work and just the content you put out there is because you are a perfect example of someone who definitely loves Bitcoin, but that's far from like your only thing, or even I don't know if it's even like you consider it your number one in your life because you are really into holistic health and posture and exercise and movement, and the sun is really the thing that I love how you talk about the sun so much. So we'll get into all of that, but first I just want to hear your story, dude. So where did you come from? How did you end up where you are right now?
Yeah, man.
Start way back.
Question.
Give me everything, dude.
Okay, yeah. I grew up in the Catskills till like middle school, upstate New York, and then down in Florida since then for a while. I left after college. But I actually grew up a very like I was on the computer a lot as a kid, right? Like very non-physical, non-out. I was fortunate when I was really young. We were in the mountains and definitely like would run into the woods as a kid and like spend time just unstructured in nature. So I did have that like early childhood. But from the time of like the N64, like I was on the computer, I was playing video games. I was a big reader, read a lot of books. So I grew up a very like non-physical, didn't play sports, like middle school onward, inside a lot. And you go to, during that era, like through high school, and by the time I was 19, I was like very, very consciously aware that things were not working like in my system. It was like I was for a variety of reasons, just in a variety of forms of dysfunction, like physically, emotionally, like fortunate to not have like major health problems or things like that. But, you know, the system was not thrilled. There were problems. And because of that, I'm really grateful for this. Like I kind of had this really early motivation when I was still pretty young. I was like, I've got to figure this all out. Like I had a ton of muscular skeletal tension, headaches, like different things. And so I got really into the first thing I did was actually this like early form of, I wouldn't even recommend it, but this like posture therapy program. So there was an early introduction to that. Ultimately, it was pretty lacking. It lacked a lot of stuff I learned later on. So it wouldn't be my recommendation. But I kind of started on that journey then. And obviously that was before Bitcoin. But I was really I got increasingly into kind of movement ideology, so different styles of movement, like how do you train the body, how do you improve the body, like what is the function, um nutrition. But I mean, at that time, I mean, I tried being vegan because that was what you did at that time, right? Like that was like, duh, that's the healthy thing. If you want to be healthy, like you go vegan. By the time I was in college, I think I read Weston A. Price's work for the first time. And he was this British dentist who traveled around the world in the 1850s, looking at, basically lived with indigenous communities in like 30 different communities all over the world, and found they just had like fantastic teeth, like no dental problems. And he set out to prove that a vegetarian diet was the right diet. And what he discovers is that they're like walking 100 miles to get fish eggs. They're like really prizing like liver and fish eggs and all of these more unusual animal foods. And so that was kind of in college, and that's when I stopped being a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for 18 years, and
Wow. So
yeah,
you got your time in.
I got my time in. From when I was a kid, like I kind of grew up that way.
Hmm.
And I stopped right after I kind of read that book. And I mean, that was I felt so much better. Like it was just a huge improvement there. But so, yeah, so like, 19, college, I'm exploring physical stuff. There's this guy, Ido Portal, that got popular on the internet for like being incredible at like all sorts of movement kind of systems. I got into that. Anyways, long story short. So that was kind of young adulthood into all of that. I graduate. It kind of got into software a little bit. I ran a software development agency, started a couple businesses. Early one failed, of course. First business kind of always fails. Started a software development agency after that, got into Bitcoin around 2017, started consulting for clients there during the bear market. So I'm kind of trying to work in Bitcoin during 2018, 2019. I'm doing a few things here or there, but it's not full time. I got introduced to this system called functional range conditioning. Now, this was the game changer for me. On a physical level, this is the thing. This is the thing you should go out and do. Like, this is the thing now, today, you should go look up, you should go out and do. This was the game changer because I had tension, I had headaches, I had like various issues, like from just not having a good baseline. And I tried doing a million things, but there were some lingering issues that just nothing, I tried physical therapy, I tried yoga, I tried weightlifting, I tried these things, but there were these underlying musculoskeletal imbalances that hadn't been kind of corrected. And FRC was the thing that really knocked that out. So I got certified. I got introduced to it probably in like 2016. I got certified as an instructor and practiced it professionally for a little bit, probably in 2019 on the side. But that was a game changer. That was I don't use that account, man. That's ancient, but proof that I at one point did that.
For listeners, I just typed you in on Instagram, and it looked like this super old picture, and it says functional range conditioning mobility specialist in Florida.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
like tell me about that, dude. That's
okay.
That's an interesting skill set, I'm sure, and you probably help some people out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So proof that existed. That is an ancient Instagram account that was mostly memes about this system. So this is the system. So functional range conditioning, it's developed by this guy, Andreo Spina, and he's a doctor. And basically what Spina realized is that all of the kind of fitness workout, like let's take like gym, like lifting, right? That's something that's really popular. People understand well. What is the underlying research and framework that informs common perceptions of how to weight train, right? Whenever we go to do things, there's some sort of systematic ideology that's informing why are we doing 3 sets of like 5 to 10 reps? Why are we training at this cadence? Why are we doing it this way or that way, right? So
just digging into first principles of it. Like I think that, yeah.
Exactly. So, and the answer to that with weightlifting is Russian studies from the 50s, like 20s to 50s. We're still using the same principles that the Russians developed for the initial like Olympics where the USSR was competing. So Spina sees this and he's like, that can't be like the best we can do. Like we can't have not learned anything. And so he goes in to the research and reconstructs a training methodology that is like a first principles approach that is based on like what we actually know. And my God, it's magnificent. It took care of all of the issues I was facing with and provides just like the best theoretical framework for training. And so one thing they came to kind of set the stage for you and for listeners, like this is kind of a later model from their system. There's kind of something called the functional range systems internal strength model. And so I'll give an example of how these guys think of stuff. So the traditional model is saying like, hey, say I want to have a big deadlift, right? Like I want to go deadlift. And so the way we typically think of it is, okay, I'm going to go to the gym and do deadlifts. And the measure, so the skill, the training, and the like measure of success are all the same thing. The skill is deadlifting, the training for deadlifting is deadlifting, and the measure of me being good is deadlifting. They're all the same thing.
Yeah.
And what the internal strength model would say is that's the wrong way of going about it. And so what they would do is they'd say, okay, let's look at Steven. Let's look at Steven's joint function, because all movement occurs at, like, muscles don't move. They contract and they relax, right? But they don't move. Movement happens at the joint structure. My wrist moves. My shoulder moves.
Yeah.
My scapula move.
It's kind of like a ball inside of a cup sort of thing, right? That's where it pivots.
Yeah. So that, that's the shoulder, right? This is rotating in the ball and socket. We're moving. That's where movement happens. So all movement, all force, everything your body does is gated behind the ability of joints to conduct force. And so if we want to get better at things, then we should improve the ability for joints to exert force across ranges of motion. And so if we're looking at Steven and we're saying, okay, Steven wants to have a big deadlift, what should Steven do to have a big deadlift? We need to look at my individual joint function and say, what isn't working good? And maybe it's like my hip doesn't have enough internal rotation or enough external rotation. Or maybe I have a lot of passive range that I can't control, right? I can't actually put my wrist there. I lose it, right? A lot of people struggle with this. This is just because you can see it on camera easily. But so the internal strength model would look at those, assess the body, the internal structures, and train outward from there. And
interesting.
Yeah,
I love it. That's totally different. I've never heard that before, and this is definitely a different way of thinking for me. I certainly, like, I've done lifting mostly since I was like a teenager, and definitely fell into that camp of want to be big, lift weight, push big weight go up, and it's just like it seems simple. I think most people just fall into that because it's very simple. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And like so many other things, when you do that, you just sort of get stuck in that mindset of like that's what you're supposed to do. It's just the way it is, and there's no other deeper thinking into what other things are going on here, because the human body is just this crazy machine. And there's so many different angles to attack like improvement and how you can make it better. So
exactly,
super interesting, dude. So that is what you would credit as fixing your problem. I'm sure that could help other people out too. Where could people go just to kind of dig more into that specifically?
Yeah. And just real quick, and like, I love lifting big weight. Like, that's an awesome goal. If you want to lift big weight, if you want to have a big bench, if you want to deadlift 600, whatever it is, like, great. Like, that's fine. It's no bearing on that. But maybe the way to do that isn't doing that exclusively. Obviously, you need to train it. But it's this little assumption in the back of everyone's head that says the best way to get good at a deadlift is doing deadlifts. Well, and it's intuitive, because if you never deadlift, well, you're not going to get good at deadlifts. But the middle road, the optimal path, is actually some deadlifting, but way, way more focus on, because in the time that and I'll answer your question, but in the time that I worked professionally as a FRC instructor and like worked with people doing this, I never met a single person that didn't have major being a range, like joint dysfunction somewhere in some way. And these are dudes like there's like in the training that I did with Spina, there's dudes in there that could squat 500 pounds, right? Like strong people. These are not like people that have no athletic prowess.
Yeah.
And their hip basically couldn't move more than 10 degrees in either internally or externally rotated. So like even people you know who are very capable doesn't mean that this isn't a factor. And then these become not just like, would their performance go up if they had a hip that was able to function as a hip, but what's going to happen when you're 60? A hip replacement, almost guaranteed. You don't want the hip replacement. You need a hip which can internally and externally rotate. Bottom line.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And
so
make sure you really address those things as fast as you can, because I'm assuming the more you work in that bad range of motion, the more it builds up later and becomes a problem for people.
yeah, always easier to tackle it earlier, for sure. So the website is Functional Range Systems. They have a ton of people on Instagram. Andreo Spina is the founder. There's a ton of practitioners. They've got people basically in every city in the US. So if this is interesting to you, you can go work with someone near you. There's YouTube videos. There's all sorts of stuff. If you want to perform better or you're dealing with pain, and like the Lakers use this, the Yankees use this, like 50 pro sports teams, NASA, UFC, West Side
Oh
Barbell.
wow.
Like
Cool.
this is the, like if you're in the pro like leagues, this is the kind of PT methodology that they're using now.
Yeah.
So check it out.
That's awesome, dude. And I just love this pattern I'm seeing of more and more people, specifically in Bitcoin, are just starting to think about all these different aspects of health totally differently, and just looking at more traditional things as well. Like I would say this is kind of like a something maybe has never been talked about before. Maybe it was like in the ancient history, who knows, but it's a new idea, and there's a mix of new ideas coming in and more traditional ideas. And one of those, which is the thing that I was super excited to talk to you about, is the sun. Like
Yeah.
this is something that we've completely neglected in the modern age. Like people, even people who think that they're pretty healthy because they go out and they lift a bunch of heavy weights after work or something, they might go running sometimes, but they still have they spend most of their lives under a roof. I'd say like the majority of people now are in that routine where they wake up in the morning, they get in their little rolling hunk of metal, they go and they quickly scurry into the front door of their building, maybe get like 10 seconds of sun on the top of their head, and they
With
do their
sunglasses
job
on.
with sunglasses or a hat, covering themselves up because the sun is bad, and they go to work and they get back in their hunk of metal, they drive home. Another thing that this completely eliminates is touching the ground and or the earth, which is one I'm sure we can talk to later. But the sun is something that people have completely forgotten. So tell me why. Actually, I'm going to start with a quote real quick that I absolutely love. Do you know Soul Bra on Twitter? Do you
Yeah.
follow that guy?
Yeah,
He's
yeah, yeah.
amazing. This is a quote that I want to start this with and hear your thoughts. He says, "The more time you spend in the sun, the more charged with purposeful energy you become. There's a reason why most tan people are also awake. They are shining with resonant energy downloaded from the sun that's giving them the strength to pursue truth." And I just thought that was an epic quote. And the question I have for you is like, is that like crazy woo woo stuff, or like, is that real? Is this something that people need to thrive? Like, tell me your elaboration on that.
Yeah, great question. So we'll probably get into the science of it for sure. And but on that quote, like, it's kind of a metaphorical quote. Not even metaphor. It's like it's not a claim about data, right? It's not a quantitative quote.
Yeah.
In my experience, like phenomenologically, like what is my personal internal experience? Like I'm outside constantly. I get tons of sun for years. Yeah, I experience the same thing. That's my personal experience. So that doesn't strike me as far off. Like obviously when we're talking about these concepts like truth and meaning and drive, like, like different people mean different things when they say that, but like go live our circadian lifestyle, go out in the sun, and like you're jacked up, man. Like that's the only way I can put it.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the science backs up. It literally is energizing. It literally gets your energy peaks, all of that functioning. That's an easy claim to make. Does that transmit into like drive? Well, yeah, man, it increases your dopamine. Your dopamine functions much better. So that's a reasonable claim to make. Like dopamine is like the desire. I mean, people think of it as like a reward thing, but it's really more about like desire. It's about going for stuff. It's about, and so it does do all of that. So not to try to like, I'm a big, like, let me be clear. I'm not one of these guys that tries to reduce everything into biochemical explanations or thinks we can't know anything outside of the science or the research, or even disrespects like more archetypal or meta, like analogical or these broader claims. I just want to be clear to say like, yeah, I experienced that in a literal way. And I had no problem with that explanation. And if we were going to try to like back that up for skeptical audience members, there's a lot of reasons to believe that those sorts of experience would be cultivated and produced by having a good light environment.
And this is deep in the history of humans too. I mean, you go back to the earliest cave drawings, and it like basically all records we have of human life as far back as it goes. There's pictures of people just chilling with the sun coming down on them, and
Yeah,
they're just absorbing. And you probably follow Carnivore Aurelius too, right? That's another big sun guy.
familiar with them. Yeah.
He was sharing some information from these historical pictures of people with their legs up in the air doing the sun and the whole all the goods down there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something you've gotten into, but I know that that's become a new Bitcoin stereotype, is that we
Oh,
stun everything. We take the clothes off and we just let it fly. And man, I gave it a try. I started doing that. I was in Mexico recently. I just got back a few weeks ago, but we had this private roof in the place
mm,
I was staying. So I would go up there and lock the door, and I fully experimented with it, and that's like full sun in Mexico. So I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
started with like 1 minute, 2 minutes, like very low increments, but man, it's incredibly valuable. It is like drinking 50 cups of coffee in the morning, like, and it charges you up. Like it's literally
Energizing.
filling your body with charge, and it's impossible to not like get excited about and talk about it after you do it, because like, man, this is amazing. Like it feels great. I feel fantastic. It really you can't explain it. You have to kind of
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
experience it.
100.
And of course it's a funny thing in modern society, because it's so different than what people are normally doing. It sounds crazy. It sounds like something that the loonies do, but it works. And I just recommend people like carefully, gradually give it a try. And there's resources out there. I can throw some in the show notes of like how to do it safely, because you don't want to just go straight into like an hour in the sun without your clothes on. That's probably not a good idea, but it's
Yeah.
really interesting stuff, dude. I mean, have you gotten into that side of things too?
Yeah, man. So I mean, I definitely like have laid in the sun without clothes. So I remember the first time I heard this, like this particular thing.
We all remember the first time we heard it, like, what?
Yeah. So I kind of like dug into like the research and what, like, obviously no one has studied that like, sunning your sex organs. But I dug into the research. So here's the mechanism for why I think it makes sense and why it probably works. So infrared light from the sun is so that's heat. What it does is it actually penetrates 6 inches into the body. And it actually has
Hmm.
been proven to upregulate local tissue. What does that mean? It means the part of the body specifically that the light strikes works better specifically. And they've
Hmm.
replicated this with both sunlight and like near infrared lasers. They'll shine a infrared light on people's head and their brain starts functioning better. They'll shine
Really?
it on their gut and their microbiome composition literally changes. The
Wow.
body is incredibly responsive. Light is very bioactive. And so if light upregulates local tissue when it strikes it, Well, then what happens when you put light on, what produces your sex hormones, right? What produces testosterone? Well, it's probably going to upregulate its function. I mean, if it does that everywhere else, why would it not do that there? So to me, I mean, it's a very reasonable claim. And people that try to like poo-poo that as like there's no studies. Yeah, there's no fucking studies, man. What are they gonna do? Get 1,000 people to go lay naked in the sun? Like, yeah, who's funding that? Where's your funding, bro? But if we work from first principles and look at other studies with light, we see a local upregulation. We see a local effect. So if it feels good and you're getting benefit from it, and there's a mechanism for doing it, makes sense to me, man. Makes sense to me. And lots
Absolutely.
of people report the same effect.
100%. And this is the age of verify, don't trust. So like this is one of those things you just gotta try for yourself and see how it works.
I
But
know
why
some
don't
very famous people who do this, by the way. I
really
can't say who
on
they
the
are,
DL?
but some like pro very physically competent athletic people who do this. So,
And for listeners, you have those connections. You've got connections with some powerful folks. I know that from what you do. So that's awesome. That's really
I
cool. And I
mean,
hope they start getting more loud about it because that will be really exciting if we start. I mean, it's understandable. Like not every person who's in the spotlight is just going to come out and just like talk about sun on their balls like willy nilly because they've got like teams of people who want them to have like a certain image, but I'm definitely seeing a trend toward more people. And I talked about this on my last podcast with my friend Paul.
yeah,
I'm so bullish on just social media in general
yeah,
becoming a more positive thing for humanity in the future, which is a hot take. I think that
I believe it, man.
I think our generation's really figuring out that this is a powerful tool to create good. And we are past, mostly past the dark period of just being a slave to the algorithm
Yeah,
and just getting angry at everybody because that's what they want. I think that people are really starting to learn that, wow, this is a place where I can have more self accountability. I can explore really interesting ideas. And as long as I have the discipline to connect with the right people and use the networking properly, I can
exactly.
quickly and substantially improve my life. And that is something that I've experienced in the last few years
100%.
of just spending a ton of time on Twitter.
Yep.
To the outside world, people when I tell people that, they just think like, "Oh, that's terrible. Like you're wasting so much time." But as I'm experiencing it, I'm learning every single day. I'm learning so many interesting things. I'm testing new things. I'm getting new ideas, and it's been just so powerful. So I'm excited about it. And the fact there's
Couldn't
more
agree
celebrities
more.
doing that too, I think it's great.
Couldn't agree more, man. So a few things on that. For one, like I feel like I get to wake up in the morning and I go outside in the sun, I boot up my phone. So by the way, I use all my social media in the sun and I've never once I don't get into doom scroll. I don't have this like dopamine reaction I've seen people get into, they get sucked in. I use all my social media outside in the sun. I feel fucking great. I can be on Twitter for 2 hours. I still feel awesome. Wake up, go outside. I'll go on Twitter and I feel like I get to just hang out with my friends. It's an amazing, positive experience. I've met so many people. I've made connections like I'm DMing with like PhDs that are teaching at Yale or like whoever, like real people I wouldn't normally have access to. We've made friends on Twitter because we share interests, and my network just like blossomed from Twitter. It's amazing. It's all about how you use it. And the trick is, this is the thing, you can use social media in two ways: one way or two way. You can use it as a one way function or a two way function. A one way function is where all you're doing is scrolling. You're just consuming. You're consuming. You're never
Yeah.
putting anything out there. Or you can do it as a two way function. Sure, you're consuming, but you're also posting, you're also DMing, you're also commenting, you're engaging. And when you use it in that two way relationship, that's great. Like it breaks the loop. Like it's not about just you consuming mindless content. It's about you putting stuff out there and engaging with people. And it becomes this incredible tool to expand your horizons, to learn information. I've learned more from Twitter than my years at university, hands down. Like no
Same.
comparison. No comparison.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And I would even say for the lurkers out there that are doing it more one way, you can still do that and gain a ton of value. Like if you just are
Yeah,
disciplined
yeah,
with
this
who
is true.
what you're listening to. Some people just, and this is sort of how I operate when I'm getting into a new niche or something. I try to stay low key and just absorb. And there's some people that are just always absorbing, and they are those, they could be those anon accounts with the weird username, and they're just like out there learning everything, and they could be getting as much value as anybody. So it's
I'll tell
definitely
you
cool.
something, man. So this is a funny story that, like, by virtue of my job, like, I got a little window into. So so maybe I should introduce. So I run the private wealth team for Swan Bitcoin,
Hmm.
concierge, like high net worth concierge. So we work with kind of wealthy people that are navigating Bitcoin in a very personal white glove way. So I'll have conversations frequently with like anon Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter accounts. These are dudes with like 200 followers, some sort of cartoon profile picture. You think like, oh, this is just this like little anon Twitter account. They're always like the director of anesthesiology at a major hospital, or like a high-powered lawyer, or they're a public company, either worker or like management. Like so often these like accounts you would never flag are these not what you would expect, like extremely, extremely successful people that use those accounts because of like they can't be public about it. So interesting data point.
Absolutely. And that's such a huge number, like a high percentage of the most powerful people out there. They are not, public on Twitter. They're not yelling about what they're doing all the time. Most people aren't like that. It's a very small percentage that are actually sort of more marketing wired that decide to do that. And they're
Absolutely.
just so much out there that we don't see, and that is going on. We don't even know it. All these connections are being made. Like we're talking about the benefit of making those connections. A lot of them we don't even know about yet. They're just sitting there, people that are, following and following along your journey. And I certainly hope that that happens with this podcast. Like I'm sure there are people listening to that I would love to meet someday, and I just don't know they exist yet because they're still absorbing. And
Yeah.
it's all just a really cool process of just networking and being able to meet the most interesting people on the planet easily. And this is another thing, I some people think it's weird to have online friends, like internet friends. They think that that's automatically like a sad loner thing, but that's another aspect of this that I think is really misunderstood and getting better. Is as long as you're on a good path and you're very interested in learning and becoming a better person and you have your goals set, this is how you connect with people that are the exact same as you. Because I think so many of us are surrounded in the
Yes.
real world with people who are not on our level of obsession with learning and growing. And this is so prevalent in the Bitcoin world, is that most of the people that we know in our normal lives, they just think we're crazy. I know that's the case for me. It probably is for you too.
Well, and that's you hit the nail on the head, man, because it's like I could go out every night near me. I could spend every night going to bars, going to events, going to things. And the chance of meeting as many people who share my specific interests as I have on Twitter is close to zero. Like, there's no physical way I could just go to random events unless they were like highly tailored to like go to a Bitcoin conference and like duh. But there's no way like near me locally that I'm ever going to meet the same concentration of people that are into these sort of niche topics as I can like by following 100 accounts online and engaging in the comments and just meeting people, right? Like if you want to meet people that share specific interests, Twitter is the best way, hands down, to do that. Like there is no second best.
Until maybe Nostr takes it over. We'll see
Yeah.
how that goes. Have you,
Twitter Twitter style social media.
yeah,
Twitter style
yeah.
social media.
What are your thoughts on Nostr? Well, we're on this social media tangent. I love it. Like,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on the future of social media and how these new systems coming out to have a more decentralized approach will change that landscape and maybe make it even more beneficial to humans?
Yeah, so Nostr's phenomenal. I probably only set up my Nostr account maybe a couple months ago, I think. So I'm definitely newer there. The thing that surprised me about it is just how well it worked, because I'm from like class of 2017 in the Bitcoin and at one point crypto world. And so I've seen these decentralized social media platforms come and go, and most of them are either scams or just like suck. They're just like very unusable. So the first thing I was surprised about with Nostr is how easy it was to use. It really feels, for the most part, I would say like 80% as polished as Twitter. Like it's damn good. It's usable. It is consumer friendly for the most part. So that surprised me. I think the biggest drawback it has is just the network size. I mean, at the end of the day, like you can go on Nostr to talk to Bitcoiners. Like you said at the beginning, I have a lot of interests, right? Like I'm not like, my life is not specifically just Bitcoin, although I do think Bitcoin is a shelling point for a lot of the other interests I do have. And that's an interesting thing to talk about. But I actually, one of the reasons I do like Twitter is because I engage in like multiple Twitter communities, not just Bitcoin Twitter. And so those guys are not on Nostr. So for me, the network size is smaller, but that's any network. When you're bootstrapping it, when you're growing it, the tech is solid, it works. I mean, the underlying principle I love, it is a decentralized Twitter. You know, there's nobody to shut you down. There's nobody to make these like arbitrary protocol changes. So it's amazing. I hope it overtakes Twitter. I hope everyone's on Nostr. I hope Nostr wins. I don't use it as much as I could, but part of that is just like, you know, not everyone's there yet.
And yeah, it's the early days. It's just the user experience isn't as fun and addicting as Twitter is. It's because that's a well-oiled, centralized machine, and it's
Yeah.
going to take time for that to work its way up. And I think the bullish case for that is that it could take over everything, and
Yeah.
over the Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube will all just become these sort of absorbed into this decentralized system that just uses key pairs to verify.
Yeah.
And for anyone who wants to learn more about that, I'll leave a link. I made a big blog post. It's basically just a bunch of links with more info, because it's a really interesting rabbit hole. And I've been spending more time trying to talk to people outside of Bitcoin to get in there, because that's what we really needed. Just more people getting on board from outside of the Bitcoin echo chamber.
100%.
um, mhm. Excellent, dude. I love that tangent that we just went on about social media. That's super cool. But I have a couple more things on my notepad here. While we were on the topic of the sun, I want to get back
Yes.
to, if we
Yeah,
may.
yeah, yeah.
So one of your tweets that I grabbed was you posted this picture of the sun hitting the skin, and that's kind of what we were talking about before, how the sun is like literally just going deep inside you. And this is another thing I was thinking as you were mentioning that earlier, is some people think of the skin as like this wall that just stops stuff. Like, oh, if you put on like makeup, like it just disappears. And if you put on
Yeah.
sunscreen, it's fine. Like, don't worry about the chemicals. It just like it goes away somehow. But like your skin is a mouth. Like it's literally this absorbent mesh, basically. Like things are coming into it all the time. And when we're in the sun, it's the same way. The sun is going into your skin. And so I think that's like a mindset shift people need to have, is like things that you put on your body, even your clothes, they're being absorbed into you.
Yep.
And that's something I need to personally improve on, is going through my clothes, making sure that they're a good material. Because I have been following Paul Saladino talking about the polyester bullshit, and you need
Yeah.
like, I think organic cotton, I think is the one, but I need to learn more about that. Anyway,
Organic cotton dyed with indigo, like actual indigo
amazing,
plants.
amazing.
Yeah.
So you're ahead of me on that one. I need to work on that for sure. But anyway, what I was getting at was, you wrote, despite all the hand wringing about sun and skin damage, local production of vitamin D in the skin results in many benefits which improve skin health, but only if the vitamin D is synthesized in the skin. So are you telling me, Stephen, if I am just plowing through vitamin D pills, I'm not getting the same effect? Or is that fine?
100%. Yeah, you are absolutely not. So, and there's still like a lot more research to be done here, because like no one makes money selling the sun. So there's like 1,000x more research on vitamin D pills than there are like, well, how does sun differ? But there is some stuff, like we're thankful for that. There is actually more research than you would think on this topic. So yeah, it's not the same at all. So let me give a couple caveats. So when does vitamin D supplementation make sense? when you can't produce it from your skin, if that is not an option. So if you're in your extreme northern latitudes, you don't have adequate vitamin D reserves because you weren't outside during the summer, some medical conditions, and you're, you know, up north and just can't produce a lot. Okay, fine, reasonable, like carry on. But it's very suboptimal. It is so the pathway by which vitamin D happens is actually like really complex, and even the name is a misnomer. So it's not a vitamin. It's actually more like a hormone that your body produces. It's a sunlight hormone. And what gets converted into vitamin D is actually cholesterol. So everyone is wringing their hands about cholesterol, cholesterol, cholesterol. Now, I think a lot of that is pretty overblown. However, everyone's like, oh, high cholesterol, high cholesterol. Well, guess what? When you go in the sun, the process of producing vitamin D actually converts cholesterol out of your blood into vitamin D. Now, when you take a pill, that does not happen. You're not getting that conversion process. But also, there are, I don't know the exact number, but it's over 10, maybe over 20 different like forms and metabolites and submetabolites of vitamin D. When you're taking a pill, you're just taking one of those. But further, what we're discovering in that tweet that you reference is that the actual process of production in the skin, the actual act of doing it has benefits for the skin. So separate from vitamin D levels, the skin is actually benefited from the act of producing it. And this is just one of several interesting phenomena where the entirety of the sun process of human bodies interacting with the sun contains within itself these counterbalancing forces which offset things like skin damage or skin cancer risk. One of the big flaws with like the skin cancer conversation and those sort of things is that you're looking at a world where the process of studying them, we basically take a cell culture, we take some like cells in a lab, and we take a UV light and we shine the UV light on the cells and we notice like detrimental effects. UV light never exists in isolation in nature. It's alongside infrared, red spectrum, visible light. It varies throughout the day. There's other physiological processes which determine the degree of susceptibility of the skin to those effects. And also, cultured cells are not the same as the whole body. So this is something where, and what we find when we study it is not only, right, does local production of vitamin D actually have benefits for skin health, but infrared and red light striking the skin mitigates some of the downsides of UV. The studies we're doing are almost never done. They are pretty much never done with full spectrum sunlight. And then, so let me anticipate the critique. So then what people will say, like, okay, Stephen, that's all well and good. You're correct about that. But we have population studies of like surfers in Australia who have higher cancer rates. Those also have problems. Those have methodological problems where, one, not all sun exposure is created equal. It's well known that intermittent sun exposure carries some risks, but consistent sun exposure gets rid of those. And so if we have surfers in Australia, this is probably like the biggest one people will cite. What are those people doing 9 to 5? Are they working in an office? Are they inside of Goldman Sachs in Australia or some other job from 9 to 5? And then on the weekend, they go out into one of the highest UV environments on the planet on the water, which reflects it. Most
hours and hours and
likely.
hours for like the whole day. Yeah.
Exactly. So, yeah, okay, maybe those people do have higher rates of skin cancer, which, by the way, when you actually look at the absolute incidence rate, even for that population that has the highest rates in the world, I don't I'm remembering these numbers, they might be wrong. It's something like it goes from an average normally, if you're not a surfer in Australia, of like 24 cases per 100,000 to like 32 cases per 100,000. And sure, oh, it's like a 60% increase, but okay, so 32 out of 100,000 people, right? You
That's
need to
some
look at.
wordsmithing if I've ever seen it.
Yeah. So there's so many controls which don't take place in any of the ways that we've studied the supposed, and I'm sure there are some factors like downsides of sun exposure, but there's no control that someone is leading a circadian life, that they're avoiding artificial light at night, that they're building up gradually over time, that they're in the sun every day. And we know for a fact that if your circadian rhythm is misentrained, and your body thinks it's in the nighttime part of the cycle, or there's a decreased amplitude when it's daytime, your body is less able to resist the damage of UV. It is being part of that circadian rhythm, having being entrained in that, that actually tells your body when to protect and when to repair. So these are all controls which would need to happen in large scale sun studies if we were ever going to like definitively answer this question. And they're not even thinking about
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, there's no one making money from the sun. So, fat chance getting these studies funded. You're just going to have to figure it out for yourself. And this is what
it.
so many people are figuring out now is that some of, well, I would say most of the best ways on earth to heal yourself and become a healthier human are against the interests of the most powerful people on earth right now. They don't want you to learn these things. They are very clearly incentivized for you to continue buying pharmaceuticals, buying more and more food, and not having a great diet, you know, having a lazy lifestyle, sitting on a couch and just looking at the screen and consuming ads. All of these things are very beneficial to the people that have all the money and are pulling all the strings. So you are going to have to figure this shit out on your own and start experimenting. And I would love to hear more about your experiments, but
Yeah.
my own experience recently has just been so relevant to what you're just saying. Because like I said, I lived in Mexico for the first 6 months of this year, and it was a perfect time for me to really experiment with all these new sun things. And I experimented with the diet more. Basically, what I did was I really went hard into carnivore diet. I had steak every single night. I had eggs and bacon for breakfast pretty much every single day. And that was like pretty much 95%. I wasn't perfect. We had a few tacos here and there, a
Sure.
couple beers and pizza, a few times over the course of those months, but I was really quite consistent. And at the same time, I was getting a lot of sun. Almost every weekend we'd go out and we'd go walk around on the beach and just play in the water. And I was very meticulous about timing. I had my phone with me with a little timer,
Oh yeah.
and I would time how much I was in there each day. I started with like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and I would literally bring a second towel and just throw it over the top of myself so I wouldn't get too much, because I'm
Yeah.
white as fuck. Like if I'm doing like hours out of nowhere
Sure.
after coming
Yeah.
from the Northwest,
Yeah. You get burned.
you're gonna get burned. So I worked my way up. I got a little bit of singe a couple of times. But for the most part, it was a totally perfect gradual process. And I definitely found that as I continued eating more meat and having very strict no seed oils, I was really good about that. I noticed that I could spend more and more time in the sun and I didn't burn. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on like seed oils. Like, is this like, are people just too crazy about seed oils? But for me, when I cut that out, I was able to very much accelerate the amount of time and the speed at which I was getting more and more sun. I got more tan. I was having more time outside and I felt amazing. I've never felt happier, more productive, more energetic during that time. So for me, it worked. For
Yeah.
people listening, it might work for you too. But that's something I would like to throw in here, because that is an important point that people are going to be wondering, is for folks who are just used to getting burned when they're outside for too long, like they're very conditioned to think that, this thing is makes me red and it causes pain if I'm out there too long. So it seems bad.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
methods do you give those people to get over that hump so their body can learn to absorb this thing and not act badly to it? And I threw seed oils out there as one. That's the most common one people come back to. Would you agree that's primary? And what else would you recommend?
So I actually wouldn't. I wouldn't agree that that's primary in terms of like that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is timing and circadian rhythm. So what are the things that influence your ability to not burn, like your body to mitigate sun damage, to tan, to, have a good time with that? So it's two things. It's one, avoiding artificial light at night. So I use only red spectrum lights for over 7 years at night. There's no blue light, no white light, no, it's just red bulbs. You can get ones that change color, so you're not like doing a million things. You pull out an app, you switch them to red, when the sun goes down. You can have a little bit of a buffer, and then you can still see stuff. You can put a red filter on your screen. You can still use the only thing you have to get used to is red light. There's nothing else that has to change. You just need to filter everything. And that's because it will disrupt and destroy your circadian rhythm. You got to do it. It impacts everything, your hormone production, your sleep. It's not just about like sleeping or something. It's everything. It's your body's recovery time. It's your hormone production. It's all sorts of things. So if you're circadian misaligned, your body will be more susceptible to sun damage, and like you'll have less tolerance. And then two is seeing the sun first thing when you wake up, and waking up ideally while the sun is still low in the sky. So something like 7 a.m., 7:30, 8's much better than otherwise. Like early morning sun, get out there. It's the eyes. It's seeing it via the eye. No contacts, no glasses. If you can't see, just get in a chair, sit there, don't move, 20 minutes. It's very early morning, that direct exposure, it's a UVA signal that starts everything up. Later in the day, you can wear your glasses or whatever. And it's more about the brightness and the visual light then. But doing those two things is what will condition your body the most to tolerate the sun. It's being in that light dark cycle. So that's the most important thing in my book. And then it's what you did. It's building up gradually. It's gradual exposure as you're building that baseline tan. So here is my kind of here's my what do you call it? Like my opinion that most people don't agree with. Or here's where I contradict most people. So I actually think diet is way less important than people think, like broadly, not just
Really?
one specific thing. If I had to pick between light environment and diet, like door one, I eat McDonald's for every meal, but like perfect sun, perfect dark, everything's amazing. Or door two, I live indoors constantly and never see the sun, and I eat like nutritionally perfect food. I'm picking door one
Right.
literally every time.
Interesting.
And I don't think it's close. Barring like major massive nutritional deficiencies, which like people in the US don't like, not like, it's not like, starving children that like literally don't have an ounce of vitamin A in their body and are having like a legit disease. But barring like those very extreme examples, I think what happens is we have a lot more flexibility with diet than people think, but people's light environment is so bad that they obsess over diet. And that if the light
Mm.
environment and your circadian rhythm and movement, and you move frequently, if all of that stuff is like dialed in, I think that people would have much more tolerance to like non-optimal diets than people are used to. I'll give an example. Like I'm not a carnivore, and like, like when I'm like bulking, like if I'm like trying to put on mass and weightlift, I'm eating 2,500 calories of rice per day, like of like a 6,000 calorie. I'm 6'5". I'm a big guy. Like I'm doing 6,000 calories. I'm eating a shit ton of white rice, and I have no crash. I have no energy level problems. I have no digestive. I have no anything. Like it's just fine. And It doesn't mean everything is that way. And like, I mean, white rice is particularly digestible, but like your light environment also influences what you eat. During high sunlight season, there's fruit, there's like there are plants. When the sun is intense, it's only winter that there's really no carbs. So your body is actually more tolerant of carbs when there's a high UV index. And so I live in Florida, so it's a high UV index all the time. So I eat carbs and I tolerate them well. I also eat a ton of meat. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I eat like pasture raised meat. I eat like for breakfast every day. It's a bunch of pastured eggs and potatoes and low PUFA pork, like, really well raised pork. So like, don't get me wrong. Like I do all of that stuff, but if my light environment is fucked up for 2 or 3 days, I feel that. If my diet's messed up for 2 or 3 days, not a big deal. My personal experience.
That's super interesting. I love that different take, because that is something that so many of us get into. Is as soon as we start thinking about diet more, it's easy to get sucked into that as being just the entire world
The
of
only
health,
variable.
because
Yeah.
it's been so neglected from the
Yes.
modern health curriculums. And like everything we've been fed our whole life is that like diets whatever, just like go to gym and run for an hour and you're
Yeah.
fine. It's really been poo-pooed a lot throughout our life.
Yes.
So as
Yes.
soon as you realize that, it's easy to just get sucked into this world of like, wow, it's been so neglected, I need to focus completely on it.
Yeah.
And what you said is a great counterpoint to the way that a lot of these people are thinking. It's like that's still just one factor here. Like
Yeah.
the light, I love how light is this thing for you that you're really focused on, because that's a major next step for a lot of people that they haven't explored yet. They haven't really started intentionally getting sunlight and thinking about how much sun they're getting, and just adding that vitamin D infusion into the mix.
Yeah. And
Something, go ahead.
and I also like I'm well known, like I walk a lot. I walk over 10 miles a day every day for years. So I'm big on light, and the light's a big factor. And one of the reasons I like walking is because you're also getting sun while you're walking. But I move a lot. So I'm big on like, don't be sedentary. And being sedentary is different than going to the gym, because what do you do when you're not at the gym? If like you work out for an hour every day and then you sit on the couch for 8 hours, like you're sedentary. I hate to break it to you. That doesn't count. Like
Yeah.
you're not really, it's better than not doing it. But um and like what I've noticed, like if like I'm walking 10 miles, I'm in the sun, I live a circadian lifestyle. I don't eat crap, right? Like I don't eat like sugar and preservatives and stuff. Like I eat whole foods. I have a better diet probably than most people, but like, will I eat white rice? Will I eat like, whatever, like sure, like bread, like whatever. But like if I'm moving constantly and I'm out in the sun, it's like a furnace. It's like an engine. It just fucking burns it. Like, you know what I mean? Just put the food in. It just does its job. You know what and I think it's like people's energy metabolism, their systems, their mitochondrial health, it's just operating suboptimally. And so I believe people when they say, "Oh, I really feel it when my diet's off." I believe you. But maybe there's another factor there besides just like, I think ideal health would be you wouldn't be that impacted when you eat. You know what I mean? Like a really robust health is you can eat those things and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. And so it's a great
Your
first
body
step.
can overtake it and just get through it
Exactly.
without suffering. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so if there's certain foods that cause you a problem, or carnivore helps or keto helps, like great, do that. But maybe there's more to maybe your job isn't done. Okay, changed my diet, no longer getting symptoms. That's more like step one, rather than we're at the finish line.
Right.
And let's expand the range of what your body can tolerate, so that if you do like, the diet gets off, it doesn't matter as much, is my
It
way of
gives you more of a cheating buffer,
yeah.
because a lot of us have experienced that. When you try to be absolutely 100% perfect all the time, it's tough in this world.
Tough.
Like,
Yeah.
especially if you have a social life, you're going out with friends. Like when I was in Mexico, we
Yeah.
go out to the restaurant, and I don't want to be that guy, like trying to like tell the poor waitress like, oh, like what oil are they using, like
I know.
just
I know.
it's just
Yeah.
like I'm not.
I'm not that guy. I don't do
Some
that.
people are at
Yeah.
the level of like they don't give a fuck about the social implications. They will do it for
Yeah.
and make sure it's perfect. For me, that's a situation where I flex a little bit and I'm just
Same.
like, it's one meal.
Same.
A little bit of soybean oil on this one thing isn't gonna kill me forever. Um, Thankfully that I feel like that trend is going in the right direction where more
It
people are
is.
talking about it, and as more people talk about it, you get awesome young companies like Ziki Kitchens. I'm sure you've heard of
Yeah.
them. They're super loud about seed oils and how they're just using really high quality ingredients. When I lived in Austin, Texas for a year, I went there all the time because I just love supporting those businesses that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
changing the narrative, and that's super awesome. So shout out to them.
My thing
Um,
with seed oils, man, like I think they're definitely like I think they're definitely not good for you. I'm a little on the fence about like how much they're not good for you, like where it really comes down. I've seen evidence kind of in both directions. I'm also kind of like a linoleic acid skeptic a little bit. Like I think there's a world where linoleic acid isn't that bad for you, but seed oils are for a different reason. There's something else going on there separate from the linoleic acid content because mitochondria actually prefer linoleic acid. If you put them in a bunch of fatty mediums, they will select for that to make their like phospholipid bilayer. And so there's like there's things that it's good for and your body wants it. In young children, if you feed them higher linoleic acid like from peanuts or something, they grow faster, like they grow bigger. Like, if you're bulking or something, if you're trying to build mass, like, bro, like peanut butter is great. Like linoleic acid is like energy, it triggers certain responses. But there's a world in my head where, and I don't know if that's like fully correct or not, I've just seen some stuff kind of pushing back a little bit on that. But I think there's a paradigm where maybe that's true and seed oils are still bad for you for some other reason. I don't know. But my big thing is just that, like, what the fuck's wrong with olive oil and butter, my guy? Like, why do you even want to use these things? Like, I don't cook with them. Like, let me be clear. Like, I would never use one in my kitchen. Like, bro, like, do you not like olive oil? Do you not like butter? Do you not like just use different oils? Like, even if it's a 10% chance, like, why? Why are you doing it? You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, dude. I love that. One of the things that you mentioned earlier that I would love to dig more into, had to circle it, is just vision and eyesight and how that comes into things, because that's a very important thing of being a living, breathing thing that walks around in the world, is having
Yeah.
good eyesight. And I had a couple of experiences while I was in Mexico, actually, that spurred me into starting to accumulate a little bit of research and Twitter follows and people who are really deep into this, because I think there's a lot to dig into there. Couple of examples. I was in this house full of these people from all over the world. It was like a co-living, co-working space. So there's a few Mexican people, a few Italians, a couple Germans, English. I was the only American usually, but I started noticing, or there's actually one specific night we were all having a dinner together. There's probably like 8 or 10 of us. And I noticed that every single person at the table, except for me, was wearing glasses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of just was like, whoa, that's crazy. And then a couple of weeks later, I was with this girl on the roof of the house. I told you we had like this private roof, and we were looking at the stars, and I was just talking about, oh, like look at this cool constellation, and she had to put her glasses on to see it.
Yeah.
And that was it for me. After those two experiences, I was kind of thinking, this is crazy. These people are all in their 20s.
Yep.
And I think it's become so normalized that a lot of people have glasses or contacts, and we don't really
Oh
dive
yeah.
into that. Like, is there anything we can do about this? Like, I feel like the prevailing knowledge is like, oh, if you need glasses, that's it. You're done. Like your eyes just suck, and you're gonna need them your whole life. You're just gonna have to keep increasing the prescription size. And so I put this tweet out on Twitter, and I'll put it in the show notes. I essentially just said like, what's going on here? How come younger and younger people are needing glasses? No one wore glasses, hundreds, thousands of years ago. Humans were all fine without them. The vision wasn't even a thing. And I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, it's because people are looking at screens too much. People are, not getting enough time out in nature maybe, but I just think there's a lot of things to dig into there. And you mentioned how looking toward the sun is interesting. What are your thoughts on just the vision piece in general? What's going on there in the world?
So I'm really happy you asked this question because I just looked up the number to have it in front of me. And I got a result that you're really going to love because it's from 1971. The
Yeah,
trend
beautiful.
changes. So what the fuck happened in 1971? Okay, so from 1971, myopia has increased from 25% of the US population to 41.6%. If you
Real
go
quick, could you define myopia real quick? If you know the
nearsightedness, nearsightedness.
nearsightedness. Okay. So that means you
Uh,
can see things close but not far.
Correct. Yeah, you've
Okay.
got it. Rates are even higher in China, over half of the population.
Wow.
So yeah, like pretty much half of people need glasses, and you don't notice it a lot because so many people wear contacts. I actually need glasses. I'm like fortunate enough that like it's not too bad, so I kind of just don't wear them unless I need to like read signs at long distances or something. Um, but what I noticed is, so I'll tell you a story that I think will fit into this. So when you have glasses, you kind of go to the eye doctor every year or two or whatever, and they basically have to increase your prescription. Like your eyes get a little bit worse year after year after year. I basically at some point, like way before all this stuff, I was just like, this is bullshit. And I kind of just like stopped wearing them. At that point, and especially since being outside a lot, like there's been no further degradation. Like my vision completely stopped getting worse the moment I took the glasses off and spent time outside.
Interesting.
So it is certainly like there's a huge function of being indoors, being under artificial light. Like part of it is view distance. We're just always looking at stuff close to us, and so like far atrophies. But another part of it is like blue light is literally toxic to the retina. Like blue
Right.
light is literally damaging your eye. And people might say, now, Stephen, why is that? How is that possible? There's blue light and sunlight. Like we're exposed to blue light in every day. Yeah, but it's in like vastly different ratios and balances. There's much less blue light. There's much more red light. There's a spectrum there, but there's also no blue light in nature past sundown. And so we're kind of taking this slightly neurotoxic light spectrum and we're just blasting ourselves with it all hours of the day and night. And so this is part of the story too. Now, can you recover? Can you heal? Can you improve your eyesight? Absolutely, you can. I know a ton of people who have done this. The only
And this
reason
is shocking to a lot of people. They'll hear
I
that and
know,
they're thinking, "Wait, what? I can heal
I
my eyes like everything else in my body? That's crazy."
yeah, there are literally exercises. The one that I think is the gold standard is like shifting your focus from something in the foreground to something in the background. So you go outside, there's something
Yeah.
close to your face, focus on it, and then focus on the tree line, and then focus on it, and then focus on the tree line. If you do this, your eyes will start like tearing up, like you'll sneeze, maybe you'll like you'll feel it, you'll get tired after a bit. And I think that's kind of the gold standard. The only reason I haven't gotten like super into this is just that my eyesight isn't quite bad enough that I really care that much. Like I don't wear glasses throughout the day, so it just doesn't bother me that much. But I know people that have really worked on it, that have basically restored, no longer need glasses whatsoever. I
Yeah.
actually read a book when I was 18 about a guy who was born legally blind, like couldn't drive, couldn't do shit. And he restored his vision to the point where he can literally drive without a prescription now. He's a Israeli guy. I could find the book, but
Oh, I want to hear that book. That'd be a great one to throw in the show notes. That's
yeah.
fascinating.
And he did it with like basically a bunch of eye exercises, a little couple nutritional interventions, but a ton of eye stuff. And he fixed his eyesight, man. I mean, it's like biological tissues are highly adaptive. They respond to force inputs. So this is a basic principle from FRC. Force is the language of cells. If you think about like what's happening in the gym, you're putting force, you're putting kinetic energy into the muscle tissue, and your cells and connective tissues and muscles are remodeling and adapting in response to those force inputs. Force is how you speak to cells. So when you wear glasses or you live indoors and you completely tell your eyes that they don't need to be able to dynamically focus and readjust and adapt to sunlight and bright light and dim light, they just stop doing it. If I stop lifting my arm over my head, what's going to happen? I won't be able to lift my arm over my head. If I stop using my eyes to do what they're supposed to do, what's going to happen? My eyes will stop doing what they're supposed to do. It's just literally how bodies work.
Absolutely. And I have really taken these things very seriously, even though I've never needed glasses. I've always considered myself lucky because I've been surrounded by people wearing glasses and I've always had perfectly good vision. I can just see things at all distances and I take it for granted. But the more time I've spent around people who do have this, 5 minutes, awesome. We'll wrap this up. I saw your message where we got 5 minutes left here. So I'll just finish with this quick story and we're going to do final words. I have been starting to look at things that are far away more because that's one of the major things I've heard.
Actually, I have more time. This just got pushed to 4. I have till 4, so I've got like 23 minutes.
Oh, beautiful. Sounds good.
Cool.
So one of these exercises, as you put it, this is something that people talked about, is just looking at things that are far away, like looking at the horizon.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
because as we were mentioning earlier, people today are just looking at things close to them more often. We're looking
All
at
the time.
computer screens, phone screens, even books, like even like good things. Like it's good to read a book, you're still focusing close to it. So you still should offset that by looking at things that are far away. So I have taken that seriously. I've started spending more time just saying, I'm going to go up and, find a high place and just look at the mountains or look at the horizon and just stare.
Yeah.
And that's good for your eyes because
Yeah.
you're giving it practice with that focus. And would you say that for people who have bad eyesight and they need glasses to see things that are far away, I think you mentioned this, but it's still good even if you can't see it very well, right? It's
Yeah.
that just means you need to work it out more. It's like a weak muscle. Like
Yeah,
if you look
exactly.
into the distance, it's a little blurry, just do it anyway because your eye's going to get more used to that. It's going to adapt and it's going to get better.
Yeah, that's like saying if my arm is weak here, that then I shouldn't try to strengthen it there. Like, no,
Mhm.
you more so you should do that. Like if your eyes are weak there, yeah, like if you could see it perfectly, you wouldn't need to do anything. Like, you know. So
I'm so excited to explore that more because I feel like this is something that people truly think is unfixable and they've
we do.
just
Yeah,
kind of given
they've
up
just
on it.
surrendered. They've just surrendered.
So I'm going to continue digging in that rabbit hole. I can't wait to explore it more. That's a really interesting one.
The
And as you talked about walking being another thing that you're really into, even just walking around will do that because you're going to be looking
yes,
at things in front of you. It's a further
exactly.
distance. And
Yeah,
maybe that's part of the reason why I've had good eyesight is because I do a lot of walking. I also love walking.
yeah,
And you're naturally just going to be looking ahead and seeing the world more when you do that. So
love it.
I mean, walking is so powerful. You touched on it a little bit earlier. I think we should dig into that a little more here because that's a
Yeah,
huge thing for you. It's just getting lots of steps in. This is sort of another one of these legs of health as we're
yeah,
going through these. You mentioned earlier that it's not all diet. You need to have good light. And once you put those two together, you're going to be vastly improved. And then
yes,
you add on the vision component. You're going to improve your eyesight. You're going to be able to see the world around you better. It's like we're building just these layers of first principles health that I think people haven't thought about much, which is awesome. And this is more and more people are coming into this world. Another one on that you would agree with me is extremely important is just walking.
yeah,
You don't need to be a marathon runner. You don't need to be breaking records at the gym. Just walking to me has been such an important part of my life in the last few years because I've been doing a lot of traveling. And for me, walking has been sort of a way to see the new places I'm living in because I've been moving a lot. It's I just get more familiar with my environment, so that's the first benefit. And I also find that it really gets my creative juices flowing. It brings the
yes,
creativity out.
yes,
And I know
yes.
you've talked about that before, so maybe that's where we can start.
Okay.
What's happening when you're out going for a walk and why is it that our brains just pick up these new things and connections are just made faster?
Yeah, so let's attack this from a first principles level because there's research showing like huge boosts in creativity, walking. Steve Jobs would always do walking meetings. CEO of Uber, he had a figure eight. He would just walk miles around the Uber office. So there's a ton of examples of high performers who have done this.
Yeah.
Einstein, Thoreau, anyways. But let's tackle this from a first principles level, not just like recounting data. So the way I seek to understand this, the way I understand this, so what's a brain? how did brains and why did brains even come into existence? What did the first brains do? And when you look into this question, what you find is the earliest brains only did one thing: movement. Movement is the reason brains evolved. It wasn't thinking, it wasn't information processing, it wasn't sensory experience. If you actually think, those are almost a little superfluous relative to the ability to move around an environment.
Right.
And so the earliest brains did one thing, and you can find organisms today. This isn't theoretical. You can find these organisms with these very, very simple brains today, and all the brain does is govern movement. So at the basic level, the core part of your brain, its function is moving the body. That is what it does. And all of these other functions, they came later, they're built on top of it. And so if we assume that as true, that brains evolved to move, then it's not far-fetched, right? That when we're moving frequently, or conversely, if we don't move, that all of the like higher order functions suffer. Let me give an analogy here. So actually, I'm going to go to functional range systems again. In FRC, there's understanding that at the deepest part of your joint structure, there's something called a joint capsule. And this is this little part of the joint. It's not really a thing. It's more of a terminology for labeling it, but it's the deepest part. It's the deepest stuff in the joint. And there's literally a physical space around it that can be bigger or smaller depending on how healthy the joint is. So a more healthy joint has a larger space there. And a really unhealthy joint, it'll literally get impinged. It won't be able to move. But so the joint capsule for every joint in the body, with the exception of spinal vertebra, the deepest function, what does the deepest part do? It does only one thing: rotation. And so rotation is the core function of all joints except the spine. And so if your deepest function, if your joint capsule is impaired, everything that comes on top of that suffers. If you get somebody with really bad joint capsule ability and all you do is improve the function of the joint capsule, all of their lifts will go up even if you don't train them. Like getting that working better, everything on top of it instantly starts functioning better because it forms like the basic building block. And so if movement is the basic building block of the brain, then when we improve the body's ability to move, to sense itself in space, then it's reasonable to me to assume all the things built on top of it, like creativity and cognitive processes, those improve too. And that's my experience of walking. I mean, it's like you, man. I walk and like my mind is going, I'm focused, I'm attentive, I'm creative, I have ideas, my energy's good. I've literally like, you know, I've run like basically tests where I'll compare it and then I'll sit for a day. And it's night and day. I mean, if you do this for a while and you then run like a control study for yourself and for weeks, you just walk every day and then take a day where you just sit there and clock how you feel, and it will be radically different.
I love that, dude. I think that there are so many people that are in the same boat of just self-experimentation.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it and I've seen enormous benefits. You've been doing it. Here's a question, and I love that we've gone completely deep into the health side on this episode. We'll have to do a future one about Bitcoin and inflation, all these things that you're actually like online famous for talking about. We just gone totally different direction here.
Let me jump in because you just reminded me of something I wanted to say earlier.
Oh, sure.
So like we're going to get into this. Like what I actually do for work is actually completely different than this. But you said something, you talked about how great you felt, how energized with the sun and how much it's influenced. Like, let me be clear to the audience. Like, I don't have anything to sell. I make no money from it. I don't have a newsletter. I don't have a product. I don't have a supplement line. I don't coach people. I don't like literally like the only reason I come on and talk about this is because it has made such a huge difference for my life. And I think people should know about it. Like I literally have zero monetization. I do something completely different for work. This has just been such a big deal for me and other people that I've seen do this that I'm very vocal about it. So it's like you, I just realized like how much of a difference it made for me. And that was enough to get me shouting it from the rooftops.
And this is why it is such a powerful skill and critical skill in a modern age to be able to spot people's moral values, where they're coming from, what their incentives are, and why they're doing what they're doing. I feel like a lot of people, for me, that was a learning process. I went in a perfect example is I, started out listening to crypto people, and then I figured out, oh, it was Bitcoin only. And that was a process of learning how to, figure people out. Like where are they being paid for this? What are their incentives? Why are they saying what they're saying? Once you can really attune your bullshit radar to a high level and you start finding people who are not making money off the things they're talking about, or they're at least they're incentivized the right way. So even if they are making money, it's
Sure.
in a good way. It's
Fine. Yeah.
they disclose it. But that's going to get you so far because there's such a mess of corruption out there at all levels of people just talking their books in every area. So once you can get through that and figure out when people are bullshitting you and which people are just trying to make the world a better place and which people have reached that level of like really having that wide ranging view, it's a superpower to your network.
Absolutely. One more interjection. I'm sorry, but you just reminded me of something else.
Send it.
This is really important. I think this is a really important topic. So we were talking earlier in the conversation about like, I was saying like, in order to do the actual sun study for skin cancer and stuff, you would need to control for so many things. You would need to get people that actually did all of their circadian stuff. And like to answer the question, is the sun actually bad a risk factor here? Or is it just that we're unprepared to be out in it and our lifestyle sucks and it's a risk factor, right? Among other things. But and I think we said at that time, like, yeah, which is never going to happen. You said like, oh, like there's no money in that. I agree, there's no money in that. But there's another reason that'll never happen. And it's because you're not going to find 2,000 people, 10,000 people who actually do those things sufficiently enough. So why does this matter? It matters because I'm telling you that we will never actually do the right study here to answer this question definitively. So what do you do? I'm telling you, it will never exist. You will never have the study that actually gets a large enough sample size that is methodologically correct and really tackles this question. But so, okay, so it won't exist, which means you can't find the answer there, which means, and this is the point, you need to come to your own conclusions. The answer is not there. There is no scientist who can say, this is definitely the answer, because we cannot do the actual study necessary, sufficiently replicate it to actually answer this question. So what does this mean for you? It means you need to live and function under incomplete information. That's what it is to be alive today. This kind of chasing after a complete model of things doesn't exist. You have to go off partial information and you have to make decisions because you can't wait for certainty here. You can't wait to act. There's a price to waiting. If you just like sit inside with sunscreen on, waiting for some institutional consensus, you'll be fat and dead before anything comes about. And so this is just this critical, almost like epistemological, like this knowledge. It's like, how do we relate to knowledge? Like, how do we make decisions under uncertainty? And it's this rich topic where, yeah, you're not going to have certainty on, and that's on all these things. And like, it's this very nature, it's this very question of like, institution, for something to be institutional consensus, which can be wrong, first of all. So even institutional consensus can be flawed. But by its very nature, all the stuff you actually care about will be outside of institutional consensus, because institutional consensus will only exist around super normative shit, like just really normal, like, oh, like, whatever, cigarettes, whatever. Like, okay, but any of these questions that are a little more forward thinking, that are a little more outside of consensus, there will never, by like its very definition, it will never be able to be found there. And so this era, this kind of internet guy who's gotten very popular, and what I mean is like the swashbuckling, study reading, health hacking, like do it themselves person that I think me and you both relate to and have met a lot of people who embody that archetype. Like this
The
is the
bro
future.
science.
This is the future. This is the future because there isn't, they've kind of psyopsed you into thinking the truth is within institutional consensus. And my thing that I'm telling you is nobody has the truth in that way. There is no certainty in that way. Everyone is operating on incomplete information. So you need to choose your heuristics, your things that you think are true. For me, one of my basic operating principles is if 10,000 generations of my ancestors did something, it's probably okay. And the you trying to prove to me that the evolutionary conditions of all of humanity up until this point, being in the sun, eating meat, is bad for me, like you better have like a weight of evidence bigger than Mount Everest, because that's an incredible claim. Anyways, so just like a couple comments on like what it is to navigate the information landscape in the 21st century.
Stephen Lubka, my man. I love your rants. It's amazing. I haven't even put a scratch into the notes I had for things I want to talk about. And I think that's a sign of great conversation every time.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
So we'll for sure be doing this again.
Nice.
I want to make sure to let you go so you have a little bit of a buffer before your meeting you've got soon. But do you have any final words to throw into the ether before we exit it?
There's this word, interoception. And what it means is like your sense of your internal state. You're feeling your body, sensing your body, how well you can perceive what you feel like. I actually think it's one of the most important skills to cultivate, because a lot of times I'll meet people that just have like no sense of interoception. They just don't have enough of an idea of what they feel like enough to gauge how things impact you. If this sense gets blunted, you're operating blind in the modern world, because we operate in a really challenging environment where our material culture, like our society, is structured in ways which don't work biologically. Like they're bad habits. Like, you know, working an office job for 40 years will fuck you up if you don't optimize correctly. But so what happens is people are put in these biologically compromised positions and they dial down their interoception unconsciously, because like they feel bad and they can't afford to not feel bad. So they just become kind of numb. And so really paying attention and monitoring how you feel and having a more sensitized internal sense, I think, is one of the most underrated and important factors that allows you to navigate these questions for yourself. Like if I had no interoception and I was just living in my head, then yeah, I'd be in this complicated environment where I'm evaluating everything on logical base. Like, well, these doctors say that the sun is bad for me, but my schizo Twitter bro friend says it's good for me. And if I don't have a sense of my body where I can go out in the sun and I can see what sun feels like and what not sun feels like, then I'm operating blind in this like knowledge hellscape where I can only externalize either to people telling me what to do or to studies giving me data. And it's incomplete. And I think we should all strive to cultivate like interoception. And so when you try these things and you try different diets, you try moving more, you try sun, you sleep, whatever, or you try fucking junk food and computers and screens and artificial light, you can actually discern how that's impacting you. And I think it's under talked about, and it's assumed that everyone has the same level of interoception when they do not at all.
Amazing, man. Hey, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you, bro. I cannot wait for round two. I have all kinds of ideas that we haven't even touched on,
Let's
and
go.
looking forward to seeing you in person again too. Hopefully, I'll be down to pipe somewhere. Appreciate you, brother. Have an awesome
Absolutely,
rest of your
man.
day,
This
and
was
we'll
great.
be in touch. Yes,
See
sir.
you, my man.
See you later.